Welcome to all the attendees coming in from the waiting room. My name is Joe Aiello. I'm Director of Community Engagement and Organizing here at the association. We'll wait a couple minutes. I know there was quite a number of you who registered for this event. Thank you for that. It's been a while for us here at the association. Will be our first webinar of 2024. We have a great presentation for you. McElvogue from Vice President from Teague will be our featured presentation. Sorry. But with that, I'm going to introduce my boss, our President and CEO, Jim Matthews.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Really great to be kicking off our 2024 webinar season a little bit later than normal, but I'm very excited to be able to do this today. Matt McElvogue is here, Vice President from Teague, which is a design firm, and they specialize in looking at the future. And I was very, very excited to run across Teague when I was judging for the Railway Interiors Conference Awards last fall. And I was really taken by the work they did in a project called Rome, which was to really envision the future of passenger rail service and the customer experience. And super exciting stuff. And the moment I saw it, I said to myself, our members have to see this, our donors, our supporters have to see this. And so it's been a little bit of a while since we've been able to get this organized and put together, but here we are. And I'm thrilled to introduce Matt McElvogue, who's going to take you through not just the design concept, but really the idea of storytelling to understand and envision the future, because Matt has had a chance to do a lot of that, not just in rail, but in space and all kinds of other places. So Matt, thanks so much for being here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jim. Let me get set up here real quick, folks. Almost there. Hear me frantically clicking around for a second here. All right. I'm going to go off of Lucinda, you telling me that we're all good, but it looks like I'm all good. All right, so welcome. I'm going to talk about artifacts from the future today. It's like something I get to focus on, and I want to share some stuff with you all. So my name is Matt McElvogue. I'm Vice President of Design at a company called Teague. So Jim mentioned a couple of those things, and a bit about me real quick. I came up through user experience design, so really thinking how someone interacts with digital and physical systems to achieve a goal, right? Be that something more consumer or something more related to work. It kind of runs the gamut. And then also design research, right? Spending time with users to understand their needs and what products need to do for them. And I've worked predominantly in the US, but also for quite a while in parts of Asia and Europe as well. And I sit on the executive team at Teague, and I'll talk about that company in a second, or company I work for. And I help lead our creative group, right? I have a very fun job. I get to kind of help companies and project teams think about the future and what's going to exist in that future, and then help them build that, which is quite a thrill. And a few quick things about us. We're founded in the 1920s. That's our founder in the top left. We're a design consulting firm. We're coming up on 100 years old, which is quite rare in our field. And we design interiors and customer experiences for all sorts of mobility, as well as consumer electronics, enterprise software, a whole big range of different things. And it's employee owned. And I think that actually kind of relates to what we're going to talk about today. When you are employee owned and you don't have like a traditional kind of product pipeline, but you're working for other companies, you always have to kind of like keep inspiring the market and provoking partners and industries to do work with you, right? And to think about the future. And that's part of what I'm going to be talking about today. But we're about 180 people. So it's designers, strategists, researchers, and prototypers, and we work on all kinds of things and some big, large scale prototypes for user testing and validation. You can see some of that in the imagery on the side there. So cool company to be at. And we have kind of an outsized impact, right? We work with a lot of Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, but we're a sort of small and nimble team supporting those folks. And we love really challenging problems. Like that's our whole deal, right? Maybe there's a ton to learn about that kind of space or industry, lots of technical information, regulatory concerns, lots of moving parts. That's kind of our bread and butter when you have to like kind of get in and it's not easy or surface level only, right? It's trickier than that. And I'd say we're also junkies for craft and great experience. So to do complex, but to solve that beautifully, you have to partner very deeply. So we have our mix of smaller programs, but a lot of our accounts are measured in years, and a few of our more profound relationships are measured in decades. And we have some relationships coming up on 75 years, and that creates kind of an interesting company culture. It's very rare in design and technology. Again, we have some people that are tenured at the company for 40 plus years, right? Like I go through archival imagery sometime for various presentations, and I found an image of a guy, Fred, that I work with. And I said, "Hey, Fred, is that you?" And it was back in the day where they didn't render anything. They used to hand paint all of the final kind of concepts on a project, like some of the ones I'll talk to you about today. And he's like, "Yeah, back in the day, we used to have 3 months to paint at the end of a program." I said, "That sounds quite relaxing." But I think the reality was maybe a bit more stressful than that. But anyway, we pride ourselves on really digging in and being very kind of like roll our sleeves up, quite blue collar about a problem space, and then bringing kind of beautiful design and craft to areas that maybe have been a little underserved or haven't had that in their recent history. So lately, we've been doing that on the ground, a lot of autonomous vehicles and new vehicle design. In the air, aviation's a big part of what we do. And maybe excitingly on the doorstep of space with new space vehicles and new low Earth orbit platforms and modules. So we've been doing a lot of work thinking about what's going to change and how are people going to work and maybe live in space at some point. And in the rail industry, we partner closely with service providers, OEMs, and some other groups in the rail industry on a whole range of products, right? So, or projects. So digital user experience, strategic planning for them, and then also physical spaces. And I'll talk about a few of those projects today, a little bit as examples. But on top of our transportation work, and I mentioned this earlier, we do software, consumer electronics, product strategy. We've got a long history of working in many different industries and kind of bringing our approach to different groups. So. Okay, me and Teague introduced. Let me talk to you about like kind of what I'm going to get into today, right? So I'm going to talk about two things, future casting and concept design. I will save some time for questions at the end, right, as well. So we're going to talk about like kind of, why we do this type of work, why we find it important, what it is, and also share some tips on how you can go about it in sort of a, good, better, and best mentality, right? A lot of the examples you say today will be on like the best end, but there's ways to do some of this that's kind of low fidelity and cheap to execute on. So these are two methods that we use to inspire and provoke the companies and the sectors we work in and with. And we met Jim Matthews at an event maybe last year or the year before, as Jim mentioned, but Jim thought it would be good, like he said, to bring these things to you all as potential kind of like tools in the tool belt, something to think about in the conversations you get into with legislators, mayors, Congress, the lobbying kind of that you do there, and maybe inspire kind of a way to approach some of those conversations and share visions. So I want to do some definitions up front because I think it helps. So future casting is broadly kind of a research methodology, right? We look into the future and we research kind of major disruptions that are coming down the pike. It could be in culture, could be just within that specific business or industry. Maybe there's a known major merger or change happening, and other things that are kind of relevant to what's coming next. And we could start to arrive at a point of view there through investigation of kind of current events, predictions of new technologies that are come online and disruptions that they'll bring. Could be analyzing like emerging sentiment, really anything that helps us start to like plot a potential future and then hang things off of that. And tactically, that sees us doing a lot of research. So it's a lot of reading, listening, conversing with experts and each other to start forming a point of view on what's coming next. And you can see some of the artifacts that come out of that there on the side of the screen. So it's a lot of reports that we'll write and release to companies or industries. There's normally a lot more kind of quantified data in there that we're grabbing from different sources. And then, of course, like roadmaps on sort of the major horizons that may come in the future. And we form insights into like existing behaviors that users in that system may have, right? So it's kind of like their behaviors and the motivations behind those behaviors. and we extrapolate how they're going to maybe evolve or change as you move into the future. So it's quite important for us to kind of plot these horizon lines and sort of highlight how someone's interaction with the system is going to change and the opportunities that kind of come out of that or fall out of that for the business or the industry that we're engaging with. And then the other part of the talk today is concept design. So we take strategy. It might be a future casting sort of style document. It may be an existing strategy that a company already has. And we create the topics, the name of the talk today, we create artifacts from the future for the concept. So these are images, animations, they could be a physical prototype, anything really that helps kind of bring an idea to life. And I think importantly, and this will show up in the talk a couple of times today, starts to draw a line in the sand around an idea, right? So broadly, a good concept is going to help you understand what it's going to be like to experience a hypothetical service or product or a new thing in the world. And it's going to give you an indication of the thing's kind of function and the form, right? The way it manifests. And it's common practice in other industries. I don't see it as much in rail, although I'd say that's changing a little bit. But like in the automotive industry, it's very common practice to do concept work and concept vehicles. It's about giving like ideas or form to an idea about the future, right? So how tastes may change, how a new piece of tech's going to get harnessed. It's never meant to be representative of an actual end product, right? But we use them to help with alignment. And we know that doing this kind of work, it helps you take steps more quickly towards a future and get into kind of the real work versus being frozen in what can be like kind of cyclical deliberation within groups of people. So we created, to talk about a concept project for a second, we created Roam Rail. So this was a concept that we did to provoke our rail partners. And like I said there, it's like the OEMs, service providers. We do quite a profound amount of work in rail to start conversations with them and then also new potential partners, right? And in this concept, we were really looking at, what could a uniquely American rail experience look like for passengers, right? We're trying to capitalize on the buzz around some of the investment that came under the current administration. So we were intentionally provocative with our ideas here. You can see, and I'll talk about it right now, the use of glass here is obviously quite provocative, right? We don't imagine a train's going to show up exactly like this, but we did want to inspire folks to the use of natural light and celebrate the amazing landscape that you can only really see in traveling by train in America, right? And how do we kind of harness all the diversity we have that you see out the window? We wanted to sort of blow that up as part of the project here. We also wanted to harness the idea of technology and how tech could and digital experiences could come to rail. So part of the concept, we imagined a new app experience as part of it. We found in our research that traveling by rail for a lot of people feels fairly dated just because of the lack of strong digital experiences. It's not that they're necessarily always required, but it was a sentiment that people had when we talked to them. So we imagined a single app here for like pre-trip planning, ticketing, ordering food, knowing where you are and what's happening. That's something we borrow from other industries. Like people want to know what's going on with their bags, if they've been moved somewhere else, why you're slowing down, why you're speeding up, all that kind of good stuff. But we also wanted to borrow and get inspired by like the Great American Road Trip and sort of translate that in a modern way. So we use tech here to sort of get into like planning of excursions and unique things that you could do at different stops along the way as part of the concept here. And often tech is brought in and it can feel like it anonymizes users or feels a bit more sort of antiseptic. We were trying to sort of say like, hey, tech can do the opposite here. It can celebrate feelings of serendipity and discovery that you get when you're exploring America by train. So we wanted to kind of be inspired by that. And I think the last one here, and I'd encourage you to like look for the follow-up email we have. We'll have a follow-up email that has links to various concept projects and different resources that might be useful for you all. But we wanted to paint like a beautiful picture of what the future of rail travel could be like to get stakeholders that we wanted to target with this excited before getting into requirements, regulations, all of the nitty-gritty that we know comes. We know how to build things for real, right? We partner with companies like Boeing to help them launch planes. So we do a lot of industrialization and sort of getting things to market kind of work. And that sometimes that gives us perspective to know that if you inspire folks, you have a chance of challenging assumptions about what could be and not kind of like leaning into them in a jaded way, right? We get to re-challenge some things that are worth re-challenging, right? So we like to go big on some of our concepts. You can see some of the imagery here that I think you'll agree is kind of a hopeful future for what rail could look like. So to summarize the sort of definitions and kind of intro here, they're both methods of storytelling and group envisioning, right? They provoke conversation and commentary, and they can help you begin to engender a consensus on how to move forward with the quote unquote like kind of real work that follows. And they work hand in hand, right? Like future casting helps you imagine a new tomorrow for society, an industry, a business, and all of the new challenges and opportunities that come with that. And they help you uncover new needs that people may have in those new futures. But then a concept can help show how you may serve those needs, right? And what the possible futures are for product and a system. So they will often work hand in hand, although they can kind of, for us as a design consultancy, end up kind of their own deliverables. But for you all, I think it's good to think about them as kind of two sides of the same coin. So I want to share like kind of why you do it, because I think this is critical and hopefully inspires you to think a bit differently about some of the conversations you get into. So the first one is like, no one can actually clearly see what the future looks like. And no matter what you're putting out, you're just drawing a version, right? But something I've seen time and time again, helping big businesses plan for what's next, is groups of people just aren't that good at imagining something collectively. So the larger the group, the more varied their backgrounds involved in that group, the harder it tends to be to align on something and kind of work out how you're going to move forward. So when you're doing something complicated, concept work can help you unlock what's next by drawing that line in the sand and saying, hey, here's what we think. That can help create the right kind of conversations to unlock like logical next steps. So we find it's quite important in that way to help you kind of see a path forward. So an example of that, we did some future casting and strategic planning, and it ended up doing some kind of more conceptual work with GE Transportation before they were purchased by Wabtec. Or sold to Wabtec. We'd done research and future casting around like shipping and supply chains that started to paint a picture of kind of continued load and stress. This is all pre-pandemic, so I'd say it's fairly prophetic. That load would eventually necessitate new efficiencies be found across our supply chain, right? So we highlighted a bunch of opportunities for their software services, which is a big part of their product portfolio, but also their vehicles. They had train sets, right? And kind of helping them see a path towards the need for automated train cars so that they could move to more efficient autonomous operations. And they needed to see how those changes related to their products to kind of see that path forward. So to get them there, we were producing animations about what the future could look like, what role autonomous vehicles could play in that future, how their offering could evolve to get there, but also help them understand that that creates a lot of opportunities along the way when you think of that kind of near, mid, and far horizon future casting activity. And everything was summarized in that roadmap that you see at the bottom. This ended up being something that teams hung on the wall and they kind of marched towards. It got turned into other documentation. And when Wabtec bought them, they ran with it, and they're following through on a lot of that work. And you can see a lot of the stuff that's coming out public now. That's a lot of the building blocks that they're kind of putting in place to move towards autonomous freight vehicles, which is extremely exciting. Had a really cool kind of catch up with a client from this program that moved on to other work, where they said like, yeah, they did it and they moved along with it. And they had this very enviable end to a job where they felt like they had nothing left to give, which I think we can all think is like, if you really thought your work was done and you could move on in that positive way, how cool is that? But yeah, we had to do a lot of future casting and sort of concept future work to help them understand how they could move towards that future. The second point on sort of why you do this is this type of work helps showcase how new disruptions are going to affect the things that you're concerned with, right? And key maybe there is it's cheap to understand those disruptions or anticipate them through concept work and see what people think about it and how it feels before you commit to building something. It's very important. You see too many people in different industries put out something and then have to react very strongly when they don't get the kind of pickup or success that they want. It helps you kind of explore more cheaply potential disruptions and how they're going to kind of affect your world. And when it comes to people working on something like 365 days a year, 24/7, they think about it all the time. You have to kind of help shake them free of sort of dangerous nostalgia or jadedness or strongly held opinions that may be getting in the way of dreaming about what's next and kind of aiming high in that regard. And that's true of all industries. I know, you know, and we know like rail has its fair share of that kind of nostalgia that can sometimes make it be hard to think about what's next. But it's true of even companies that we think of as like extremely innovative, like tech companies and some more consumer focused companies. They're like very entrenched in what they're doing now, how they make profit, how they provide value today, that they just can't see what's coming down the pike, emerging tech, other disruptions, and how that's going to impact them. So concept work can be a great way to help them see what changes are coming and how you can build them into a service or a future version of your service or product, and being proactive about that and owning that versus kind of rigidly holding on and then being forced to react later when it's less opportune. So concepts and thinking through conceptual thinking can kind of help you get ahead of that and own it more than having to react. And the third reason to like do this kind of work, and this seems basic, but it's important, is it's important to paint a hopeful vision of the future, right? It's important to be positive in the work that we do, and concepts can help you stay positive. I think they help paint like I said, a hopeful image of what's next. So working on an initiative, you all know this, like when you're doing the real work of getting something through, that's hard. It takes time. It ends up being detailed because it needs to be. Things fail or aspects of something fail, and it's easy to lose the ability in that to visualize the future when you've been through the trauma, if you will, of trying to get things done. It can be easy to be preemptively critical or jaded or get mired in detail, not even in a way that you see as being a safe place to be, but you can end up doing that because you know the work it takes to kind of get there. And you know, we actually see with some of our partners, it literally impacts like executive function, like the ability to like make a plan and then like manage yourself towards that plan can be impacted if you become kind of too jaded, and it's hard to see that that's happening. So it's quite important to stay positive and aim high and dream big in the work that you do, and conceptual work can help unlock that. So things don't have to be the way they've been. It's about giving folks kind of some excitement about where they could go. The realities of work, right? All the integration, operations, manufacturing, those things always enter into it. But if you don't aim high, and I hope you can see my hands here, I like to talk with my hands, but if you don't aim high, there's almost a quantifiable percentage that you're going to knock it down regardless of what you get into when you get into the details. So if you don't aim high and you aim kind of here, you're always going to land lower. So we find that it's very important to dream big when doing conceptual work and at the outset of kind of a project and planning, and make sure that you're sort of feeling the responsibility of the legacy of what you're putting out into the world, what you're leaving for people that kind of come through, or what we think about coming through after us. So in your case, the state of rail for future generations of passengers, right? How do you get inspired to kind of dream big there, to do some audacious stuff? Concept work can help unlock that. And we think it's important to paint that hopeful future. So, you know, it's important to draw a line in the sand. That's why you do this. It draws a line in the sand to move a conversation forward and like unlock like next steps. It's about showing how potential disruptions can come along, but how you can proactively integrate them instead of just reacting to them. And it's about owning and putting forward that positive view that inspires folks to strive and aim high. So that's why you do it. I want to kind of move towards wrapping up here by going through some tips on how you do it. I wanted to leave you with some kind of like tangible advice on how you take your first steps into thinking conceptually. So I'm going to go through like a good, better, best here. And like good is kind of like cheaper and faster, but it has all the critical information. And then, you know, you get down to best, it's like greater investment, but potentially more impactful. And I'm going to talk about some sort of some scrappy ways to kind of to do all of these, but they also build upon one another. So as I go through and kind of intro and unpack each of these, just know that what I talk about in good is still a part of best. And just wanted to make that clear at the outset here. So when it comes to good, the minimum for this kind of work is writing it out, right? So giving life to potential futures through a document of some kind. And I'll talk about what's most important to get in there. But it's very surprising we work with lots of different groups, like I said, but it's surprising how many groups don't have like an agreed upon document and direction that they're aiming at, right? So we do versions of this in all of our kind of future casting workshops and similar methodologies to use at other companies, especially tech companies, to sort of say like, hey, here's where we're going, that North Star vision. And I'll share one because we find it quite fascinating, even though it's not, we don't lift it wholesale. Amazon have a process called the PRFAQ process. So it's PRFAQ. Some of you may have read about that. Some of you may have experienced it firsthand, but it's a press release and frequently asked question document that they write up. It's mostly writing, sometimes a little bit of diagramming. And they begin every program by having the product owner do what amounts to being kind of like a white paper of that document. And the press release is a press release as if the product has already come out. It describes who bought it, who is a customer, what it does for them, even kind of volume of users. And those are all targets kind of internally, obviously, but they do it in this kind of future tense. And then there's also the frequently asked questions document that gets into some of the like technical detail of kind of how that thing was built and how it was installed and all that kind of stuff. So when you start a project with them, any initiative, it can be an internal one, an external, like a new product for them across all their divisions, you actually get in a room and you read that for 30 minutes on your own, no computers, no phones. And then you have a discussion after the 30 minutes about how you're going to go after that project, right? The teaming, the sort of phases of work, major milestones, then you get into the kind of planning of it, but you're always working back from this kind of North Star that they've written up. And it's interesting, they like solicit them from different groups across the company, and then upper management will like pick which ones they're going to place bets on for the year, and they become real products that they go and pursue. So it's very fascinating kind of way to do things. So when you're writing in the good version, you should write as if the concept already exists, right? So it's a technique that helps force a perspective or a point of view. You're writing in absolutes, like it's as if it's a truth instead of suggestions or options or kind of hedging your bets. You're kind of saying like, here's what it is. So you're starting to form that line in the sand with writing only. Then there's, you want to make sure that the value proposition is very clear. You should keep it user-centered. Now, user doesn't just mean passengers, it could mean crew, it could mean people that work at stations, right? There's all different kinds of constituents, but you want to talk about the value to them and explain how it works, right? Give some detail on sort of what the experience feels like or what the idea feels like. And then the last one is you got to work back from that North Star of the value proposition and give some detail on what's needed. It might be a new database that's needed or a new digital application. It might be new stations or new types of train cars, but you want to give detail on that because that gives you some ideas of the major things you have to then go solve. And it gives the whole concept sort of an air of feasibility that helps sort of have something to stand on when you get into it. And if you've been a bit technical there, you can evolve on that over time. So even though there's more real work to be done. So that's good. Writing it is sort of the first version. And you could probably see kind of how we're going to layer in some other stuff here. So when you move towards better is, I grew up in England, so every now and then my accent slips out. So apologies for that. But better is all about beginning to layer in imagery that exemplifies the concept, right? So it gives it life. The more you can make a concept manifest, typically the more impact it will have. So the old adage here is kind of true, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, but in better, you're getting cheap about it, right? Versus best, we're going to get into sort of the custom job, but in better, you're getting cheap about it. You're begged, borrowing, and stealing. So you use existing imagery, right? So find concepts and other things that are out there that represent what you're aiming for, and you can kind of collage them together to give an idea. Or you can generate quickly through prompt making and AI image generators like Midjourney and others. And when you're doing this better version, you got to be upfront about it, cite folks, but use examples that are out there and curate visuals to help embody kind of where you want to be marching, right? And what that looks like. So some tips on better, you can use existing imagery to exemplify what you're going after, right? You most likely do this already in your personal life when you're collecting inspiration for something, a birthday party, a kitchen remodel. So, you can use tools like Pinterest and other things to provide good examples of what it is you're aiming for and talking about. AI image generators are an emerging tool. They can be very useful here. We use them already in some of our conceptual work before you get into like sort of generating IP on our side. So, you do need some skill at kind of the prompt writing in order to get there, but you can build that skill, and it can be something that's gets you very good imagery, that's very provocative for the concept that you're chasing. And then the other thing to think about in this kind of version of going after some conceptual work is you want to pick images that help kind of move the conversation along. There's a skill to curation, right? So picking things that help draw that line in the sand, but not give a false sense of sort of where you're going. So that's tips for better and moving past writing into something that can be reacted to a little bit more viscerally, right? So it's including images. And then the best is, you joke, but you work with a company like us, or you find some other talent to help you build sort of the perfect fidelity for the concept that you're trying to get across, or the story you're trying to tell to legislators and trying to get them excited about the future and where they could go. You're creating a more complete concept here. So that includes custom design and imagery, getting it to be sort of like the perfect embodiment of the future you're imagining and trying to tell a story around. And you aren't using examples or AI imagery at this point. This is something that you're dialing in. So high quality presentation becomes more important to help you kind of like best support the lobbying and the conversations that you all get into. So when you create your own concept, there's also something nice in here. It's like you own it and you can keep evolving it. So imagine like the Rail Passenger Association vision of future rail travel for passengers in the US. You own it at that point. You can use it as a platform to tell other stories upon. You could tell a tech-focused story. You could tell a user-focused story. You could tell a infrastructure-focused story, and you can revisit it and expand upon it. It's something that you can kind of explore from different angles. I'm not selling you on that. I'm just kind of highlighting that once you go for best, you get that as kind of a benefit at the end of it. So, today I talked to you about like future casting and concept design as methods, why that's important ways to kind of go about changing hearts and minds through storytelling, and then shared some tips on how to do that. We'll send an email that includes links to some of the concept work here, and a link to some other resources that we have, like our innovation playbook, which kind of gives you a little bit more kind of tips on how to do some of this stuff. And then, hopefully something in here inspires you in the way you go about your work. I know it's very different than some of the stuff that you get into, but I think all humans are storytellers. We are storytellers. You tell a lot of stories as you work with mayors and cities and legislature and Congress and other groups. And hopefully something inspires you from today and kind of how you go about those conversations. And I appreciate the time. It's fun to share about this stuff. And thank you. And with that, we'll go to a bit of a Q&A. I think we're going to solicit some stuff from the audience, and then Jim and I will do a bit of a chat. Cheers.
Matt, thank you so much for that. This is so much fun. This really is the fun part. So we're going to have Joe's going to come on and walk us through a couple of the logistics around doing the Q&As. The questions have started rolling in. I'm going to execute my presidential privilege and ask the first two. But Joe, why don't you just explain how we're going to do this?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Just as Jim said, we have a number of questions in the Q&A chat already. Jim's going to kick it off with a couple of questions for Matt, and then you'll just kind of hear my voice in the background. I'll go through a couple of questions, and if anybody has any follow-ups or anything like that, please type them into the Q&A box. I'll get to them. We got some time still to come, so yeah, just let us know, get some questions in, and let's get rolling.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So Matt, I have to say, first of all, this was really super, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for agreeing to spend some time with us today.
Thanks for the invite.
But you touched on something which really kind of resonated with me when you talked about how this has to be positive, right? We have to look at a positive future when we're doing this kind of work. And I think certainly my observation is that one of the things that we see in the rail community is almost a fear of the future. There's a sense that it will never be as good as it once was, and envisioning the future is somehow going to be destructive or detrimental. And so I think in some ways we handcuff ourselves in kind of envisioning an expansive future for passenger rail, which we all say we want, right? That's why we're here. That's why we're in the association. That's why we do the work we do. And so I almost wonder, is there a sense that have you learned a sense of sort of the psychology around managing that fear of change versus kind of being willing to kind of wrap your arms around a positive future? How do you get people over that hump?
Yeah, great question. I'd say there's like a more tactical aspect to it, and then there's one that's more like kind of passion driven. So I'll talk about both, but they both kind of play hand in hand. We find that um we eventually find like advocates, right? Like people that are excited about the future. And typically the way you can get there a couple of ways. You can ask who's an advocate, and you have to like weed out who's going to be a great supporter of this, who can bring the right skill sets, that kind of thing. Or you can start painting a vision of the future. And these things act like a beacon. I'm not kidding. There's scariness and risk to being out there and putting an idea out there. But you always get people that kind of come and say, I want to be a part of that, and you'll typically find they have great skills and they have great assets that they can bring to the conversation. So we've used them, like I said, for us, it's about provoking like potential client programs, but we found like other experts, subject matter experts that have become kind of like friends of Teague, or we've even hired through putting out some of these concepts. So I think if you start doing it and you show excitement for it, you naturally attract other people. It's kind of like being the first person to ask a question. If you are the first person, it can be scary, right? And some people have a mentality that that's how they learn, so they know to do it and that kind of thing. But you normally unlock other people asking what they might have thought was a dumb question or something like that. So that's kind of like the passion, excitement side. I think as well, then like for constituents and I mean like companies and organizations that are going to be a part of that potential future, that is where you got to do your homework and you do your 4 month study that talks about how you get there. And a lot of the time with those folks, we're painting, like I was talking about, near, mid, kind of far term towards like a future vision. You highlight to them, look, that's going to change as we go along this journey. But you also pull back all of the opportunity that exists if you do the kind of cleanup from a tech point of view or from a process point of view or a training point of view that gets you there. You get all of these other improvements that lead to better throughput, more revenue, whatever it is. You can normally paint a picture of the advantages along the way. So you kind of have to take that like left and right brain kind of like approach to it all. That's how we normally get there. But we have kind of a joke internally. There was a guy years ago, like 10 years ago, that me and one of the other directors worked with named Dimitri. And sometimes we say we got to find our Dimitri, and it's the person that shares your excitement that can help you unlock other things. So we'll sometimes say like, hey, we found our Dimitri, and it kind of unlocked a project for us. So, but you have to do both is maybe my cop out answer.
It sounds almost as if there's, there you have to find a way to um, be positive without being a Pollyanna, right?
Yeah, that's a great
It's
approach.
not saying that, look, there are no obstacles. This is the best thing in the world. Let's just do it. It's recognizing that, yes, there are obstacles. Of course, there are challenges. That's why we're all here. But let's be excited about it and work through them and fix them. And it sounds as if, at least what you're describing is that process uncovers solutions.
Yeah, yeah. You got to be like a humble provocateur, right? Like you got to like get people thinking, but then be very humble about like, the work that then comes and some of the more tactical planning. And like you said, like some people will put out a vision that's very audacious, but then there's more ego wrapped around it, right? We try to approach everything with zero ego when it comes to that stuff.
So I'm going to pivot to my second question, and then we'll go ahead and turn it over to some of the questions that have been coming in. Talk a little bit more about Rome. As I said, when I was doing the judging, I was just blown away by the entry, and there was a lot more detail in the entry than we talked about here this afternoon.
Yeah.
But could you talk a little bit about how that came about? Kind of you talked a little bit about, say, the app, for example, kind of driving the experiences. A few more thoughts, kind of generally about, envisioning that future for passenger rail, kind of where that came from, and sort of how that was all grounded in the Rome idea.
Yeah. So there's some of the aspects that I mentioned today, right? So it's trying to celebrate what's amazing about traveling state to state and across America by train. It's just, one of the things there is like the landscapes, the towns you roll through. There's so much kind of amazing stuff when you road trip or move around in sort of the in-betweens of America. We wanted to kind of celebrate that. So the app, in the concept, and we'll send you the full link so everyone here can see it. But like, you know, in the full kind of concept there, the app does everything from like literally controlling your environment to, you know, instead of a meal service, you can instead like order food at a stop ahead and get some local kind of like mom and pop kind of food, and it gets delivered to the train and sort of comes to you like any other meal may come to you, right? Or it's in the dining car, or you can pick it up somewhere. So we're trying to like kind of get inspired by like innovations we've already seen like in our cities and other places and apply them to rail in kind of a uniquely rail or like surprising serendipitous kind of way. So that was one. You could plan excursions through it. We had this sort of like hop on, hop off kind of mentality that you'll see in like some cities with some like metro networks and bus networks. So we're trying to capitalize on some of that obvious problems there when you go to implementation. And then the other thing is, you know, we were trying to capture this idea. It was, you know, pre-pandemic, like hashtag like van life, nomadic work life was very much a part of it. And I think there were other things that we were already thinking about in our aviation side of the house from like a hygiene, cleanliness point of view as well. So there were lots of different workspaces where you could like do varied work day to day and sort of treat a rail ticket as like your version of buying like a big camper van and working from anywhere. So we were leaning into that. So there's lots of varied spaces, places where you could have family and stuff like this. And then we even looked at like kind of cabins that could convert from like it's you and the kids, but then it can close when it's time to have separate time, or dad's working and the kids are in the other area. So we had some concepts in there like this. And I think some of the like ability to control like your environmental controls, window shades, lights, everything from the app, I think are in for interesting when it comes to like, you know, today we have control methods we put in and then they get broken or you have to update them. That's retrofit. It's also weight that you have on the vehicle. We were looking at a more like kind of sensor and phone control driven market as well. So trying to provoke on a few different fronts, because like I said, it's like about getting our customers to like talk to us in different ways, right? So that's what we were looking at there. But we were very much trying to capitalize on like van life and work from anywhere culture.
So I could do this all afternoon. I'm not going to cheat our members and participants today out of their questions, though. Joe, do you want to set us up here for the first question?
Yep, the voice of the wizard behind the curtain. First question, could you look at new materials like carbon fiber and new methods like 3D manufacturing to improve rail cars? Actually, this is I'm sort of like a 3D printing and 3D kind of manufacturing with cars is kind of like I'm a little nerd for that. So I kind of like want to get that question out there because I'm curious with the answer.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is yes, for sure, right? I think sometimes like to relate it to the talk, like sometimes concept work can like kind of get people thinking about what that can actually look like versus, and maybe even get you as a maybe a designer or an engineer thinking about where it can truly be applied versus I think sometimes if you start the conversation just at that question with like a Siemens or someone else, they're going to be like, no way in hell, right? Because they're not quite yet imagining what you're really getting at. But and then to talk a little bit about stuff that we do, carbon fiber, like, yes, for sure. I think there's a lot of like manufacturing and sort of industrialization and install kind of works to that material. And then, but yes, definitely. And then like 3D printing, or I'm saying yes, it shows up in a lot of our work. I'm not giving you much more detail than that, sorry. But and then 3D printing, I'd say it's we have a hard time imagining it as like part of like an end product, although I love the idea of like, you know, you got to make an update so you can do 3D printing to like make a new fascia panel or something like that to like have this kind of like lower fi quicker way to respond to a change in the market or a change in tech. So we do talk about it quite a bit there, right? Like we have a lot of embedded screens and other interfaces, and we have literally worked with a space station client to come up with essentially like a 3D printing process to when inevitably we need to put a different tablet in there, we'll change the fascia panel. Because what would have happened on the ISS today is they would have put some ugly mount with a wire hanging out, and it looks like a crazy person's garage within like 10 of those decisions, right? So we try to bring it in for those kind of conversations, and we are helped by the fact that the tech is quickly evolving. But just to touch on it, as part of our process, I'd say everything you see us design gets 3D printed in one scale or another. Another one we use a lot is like large foam cutting apparatus. Weird thing to have, but we have one of the largest foam cutters in the US. So we can whittle chairs and window frames and everything. And like whenever we are designing a train, we have warehouse facilities in Everett, in Washington, where we literally have them one-to-one, and we bring passengers in and they try it out. And that includes the tech and other things that we do on those mock-ups. So it's very much a part of our process, even if it doesn't always show up like with our clients. And that's normally to do with just the properties of the material, the way it off gases, the way it's brittle at times, depending on the kind of printing you're doing. But we are seeing it show up more and more in products. So next
Great.
one, very detailed response. Sorry, but
No, that's fabulous. Go ahead,
That
Joe.
was awesome. So next question, has Amtrak, and this could for both of you, has Amtrak given any thought to its interior design for the next fleet of long distance trains?
they have. I can't go into like too much detail. I'll say like we're involved more on like the industrialization side of some of these options. I think we come by that naturally. We work with Boeing, so we help OEMs sometimes. We'll work with like operators, like I said, but sometimes we'll work with the OEM to help them not take a bath for when they want to sell that to every different operator. So we help them kind of understand the kit of parts that gets their operator partners kind of unlimited or near unlimited customization. But Amtrak are thinking about like designs of next long haul. So we're in kind of the middle of sort of marrying some of that together, but I can't get into too much more detail than that without fear of getting a nasty phone call from someone. But maybe you have a different
No, I don't have a different view. I have been privy to a couple of really fascinating design concepts, and they're really, really interesting and really exciting, and they very much respond to some of the things that we've been saying as advocates for decades. Again, I won't give away too much either, because frankly, I signed something that says I can't. But one of the things that I'm very excited to see is we've been saying for a long time, for example, that we need some kind of intermediate sleeper class type of product, right? The thing that those of us who've been around it for a long time, the old slumber coach. The idea is a very simplified, non-fancy version of a sleeper. And that's been, I've seen some design concepts for that, some visualizations for that. So it's really exciting to see. And where we are right now is, it's in an RFP request for proposals process, which means it's up to the car builders now to come back to Amtrak and say, okay, we got it. We saw your concept. We went through the request for information process. We're very well grounded on what you have to say and what you wanted to see. Here's what we're able to do. And if you gave us unlimited money, we could do this. And given the budget, we can do this. And this would be the super cheap version. But I know, Amtrak, that's not what you asked for. And so a lot of this is going to be up to the car builders to be innovative and creative, not just in the designs, but, to Matt's point, to the industrialization, to the ability to produce and repeat those designs, and to do it in a way that's cost effective. The challenge is really on for the original equipment manufacturers, for the car builders, and for their suppliers to be able to come in and recognize that this is a historic investment. This is the kind of thing, enough cars, enough train sets to really spur the revival of an entire industrial base. And so there's a responsibility there to do this in a way that is exciting, that captures the imagination, that serves the needs of the customer, that does what Amtrak needs it to do, and does it in a way that is reasonably priced, affordable, supportable, fundable, and can be done in a way that will get people excited about the mode and not cynical about the ability to get any new equipment.
Yep.
All right, we got a few more in the chat. Question from Stu Nicholson in Ohio. We've been through the rise and fall of Hyperloop in this country. How do we recognize and differentiate between disruption and a distraction?
Yeah. The short answer is sometimes it's tough. We literally were in the middle of the Hyperloop stuff. We designed like the passenger interior for Virgin, actually. So on that one, I'd say normally you listen to the engineers that are involved, which my designer friends would probably be like, don't say that, but you do, I think you need to understand like speed to MVP. So like minimum viable product, like, because if they don't have a good plan for minimum viable product, like buying land to put tubes on or whatever it is, that's normally a major red flag. I still think there are times when it's hard to detect. I'm sure the rubric I would put out for like detecting if something is a distraction, SpaceX they would have passed my, or they wouldn't have passed my test, right? I would be too critical. So I think sometimes there are audacious ones that are funded in a certain way, or someone can kind of hang in there long enough to like tip it over the edge. But normally I'm looking for like speed to MVP and their plan and path to MVP. We're a services provider, right? We want to help make our clients look great. So we normally lean in and try to like help them work that out. But there are times when we don't see a path forward and we have to like exit, even though we're there as like a sub for them. So I'd say path to MVP, listening to engineers, seeing if they have infrastructural things in place and like key building blocks are important when you're getting into like the early stages of a program.
Got to say, between Ken and Stu, you're going to get great questions. That's a great question.
Good one.
I think I would go back to the slide that you had put up about good, better, best. That process of just writing down as if it's a real product. Some of those kinds of questions, I think, would help you screen out the need for that. And so, for example, I don't think audacity is in and of itself a disqualifier, right? I mean, we're looking at right now in the long distance restoration study, 15 new routes to add to the 15 that are already on the map today. That's pretty audacious. But at the same time, yes, there are problems to be solved, but this is what we've been asking to do. So if you were to write out that paper and start to address those questions, the stakeholder questions, for example, that you put in there, I think that would suss out distraction versus disruption. I don't think audacity all by itself is a disqualifier. But I mean, personally, I asked a lot of questions about Hyperloop early on, which to my mind made it feel a bit like a distractor. But I'm not an engineer either. I think it was probably from an engineering standpoint, you could probably get there, but there are so many things that were not addressed because we skipped ahead of that ideation process, Matt, that you were talking about. I mean, one of the things that we said early on was that Hyperloop just replaces flyover country with zip through country. Well, that doesn't help anybody. And so those are the kinds of objections that we raised early on. And I think it turned out we were correct. So some of it is just about horse sense, and some of it is, I think, being open to audacity while also asking critical questions.
Yeah. So I think, totally agree. And I think that sort of like plan to MVP is what I was describing in the press release frequently asked question kind of technique that Amazon uses, right? There is technical detail and planning in there. I think as well, as a creative, sometimes you do want to lean in and help someone with a vision, even if you have questions. It's an exciting part of my job that I get to engage in because I'm not ultimately necessarily responsible for the investment they're putting in there, to see if they can get further, right? And we do that in good faith to like try help them unlock maybe some of the detail or some of the conversations they have to have that clear path to MVP. And sometimes that's how we're engaged, right? So I think you gotta be positive as well as you're going after audacious,
Agreed. I think, I can think of two examples, one rail and one not rail. The rail one is, if you had, before we actually got to the golden spike, sitting around saying, hey, we're going to take this giant continent that we really don't know a whole lot about, and we're going to connect the whole thing on rail. We're going to do it quickly. There are certainly people who would have said, you are insane. There is no way you're going to be able to do that. And if you do it, you're not going to succeed in doing all the things that you said you're going to do. And by golly, they did it. And the golden spike happened, and we connected both coasts because somebody said, you know what? Yeah, it's a big deal. It's really hard. And let's go do hard things and see if it works. So that's one example. And then the other one even complexity. I think about the Mars lander a few years ago. If you remember what was it, 15 minutes of terror, I think is what they called it. And where, you can imagine this is an engineer's fever dream that says, okay, first we're going to launch it like this, and then we're going to have it inflate. It'll be a big balloon, and then it'll be a parachute, and then it sounds like 12-year-olds like playing with Legos saying, then it'll do this, and then it'll do this. And it was kind of crazy, and it worked. And we set the lander down on Mars, and off we go. Now we have a functioning program. So crazy, complex, audacious, none of those things should be things that make you say, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But they should get you to ask the right questions and solve the problems.
Yeah, you got something to work back from. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Joe, do we have time for one more, or are we?
Yeah, so we have time for one more. I'm just going to kind of go things in order. There are some actually fantastic questions being asked. But it's my understanding that we're going to have a printout of all the Q&As that are there, anything unanswered. I will give directly to Teague, and in their follow-up email to all the attendees, they'll answer the questions that are there, because there actually are some really great ones, guys, seriously. But I'm just going to go in order just to be fair. So last question. When it comes to rail travel, users have a certain expectation that are dictated by their experience with air travel, price, speed, efficiency, etc. How do we design and communicate in a way to shift expectations in these areas while delivering a great or different experience?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great one to end on.
Oh, I love that question.
That's a good one. I think for me, you want to work out what your kind of key currencies are, right? And how you differentiate from other groups. So, for rail, the ability to like sit more communally, right? To do other activities, to engage with the outside in a way that's different than you can on a plane. Like, I think, and there is like some healthy kind of nostalgia to air travel or to rail travel as well, right? That you can capitalize on. I think the way you even like interact with a city and a rail trip is very different, right? You often pop up in the middle or more in the middle of a city versus a rail experience. So food can be very different, right? Because you're not over seasoning things for it to trick taste buds at X tens of thousands of feet. So I think there are core currencies you have in rail that are worth sort of having an opinion on for whatever it is you're designing. And you want to kind of amplify those and minimize areas where you have pain points, right? Through good product design, better digital experience, and better processes and training and whatnot. But so it's about understanding kind of like what makes you kind of the best in class at what you're doing. That would be my response.
Oh man, I wish we could spend another hour. I love this question.
Great question. It's one I read when Joe was still picking. I was like, that's a good one.
It is. I mean, think about it. One of the things I've noticed, because I get these emails all the time from members and even folks in the general public, asking things like, well, I have a carry-on and a purse. Will Amtrak let me take that on? So we've conditioned people to think that all travel is like airline travel. Well, no, Amtrak will let you take 200 pounds of baggage before they start charging you money.
Yep.
Entirely different experience. I get questions like, am I allowed to walk around the train when I get on? You're going to be on the train for 2 days. Of course you can walk around. All right. But again, it's these expectations, and we do have to sort of retrain the traveling public. Boy, that's a great question. And I wish we could spend another hour, Matt, but we are at time.
Yep.
Listen, thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to do this with us. I've had a wonderful time. I'm going to turn it over to Joe for some final thoughts. Joe?
Yeah, so just real quick, once again, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Matt. Absolutely excellent presentation. Like I said, everybody, thank you for your questions. So there's some great ones in the chat still to come. So hopefully we'll get that to Teague and they can answer for you. Just a couple housekeeping notes, as Matt said, that they'll send a follow-up email to everyone who was in attendance, everyone registered. So with some of their information and some of this Q&A, and we'll have our own email follow-up going out tomorrow with a link to, we're actually doing an online survey because we want to hear from you guys on what topics you want us to hit throughout the year. So kind of give us your feedback on how we're doing with these webinars. I know it's been a while since we've done one. Also, a reminder, a little webinar special. I know those who will be watching this after the fact, you'll lose out, but those who are still in attendance, if you haven't registered for Rail Nation coming up in 2 weeks, we just extended the deadline 24 hours. So ending tomorrow at midnight, railpassengers.org/RNDC24. Come see us in Alexandria. We have an amazing a list of presenters on the agenda waiting for you. So once again, on behalf of the association, thank you again, Matt, Jim. Thank you all of you for attending, and we'll see you on board.